with Ann Morrison, and her blog is TWILAND, TWILAND.INFO. We're working to upgrade it also to be we want to call it a subscribed blog, because you put so much effort into it every week, and this information is not freely available just on the internet. You do a lot of research to pull it all together with the best documents, the best pictures and video, other materials. We're also going to be doing after the shows on Friday a kind of a video update. In fact, yesterday you sent me some information about an outline published about the Zika through your blog, and it's a docx, so we're going to pull it open and put it up on the screen. We'll talk about it, and I'll give you the embed so you can put it on your blog, but it'll also be available here at Nutrimedical and also in our event channel on DEAGLE Network TV live stream. So that'll help people get a better perspective of what's really going on. Most of the information that you'll find on Yahoo and Google News is pretty spotty. Most of the time it demonstrates a level of incomplete information and in terms of public health, pretty significant incompetence. So we'll do that after the show today. Let's go over the blog today and what the main issues are, because I have the update I'm opening up in my Google Drive, which is pretty darn amazing. I mean, I can open it up in the Google Drive, and of course, if I want to share it, I can actually share it with anybody too, which is really cool. And yeah, so let's go through this. We have a lot of issues to cover today. Ebola, poisonings, other things, yeah.
Yeah, we're talking again about Ebola, because we have it now in Sierra Leone and Guinea, and it seems to be spreading. They have 1,000 people that they're vaccinating and that they're keeping track of, so they're under house quarantine. And Gambia is closing its border with Guinea because it doesn't want to get it. Now, we haven't heard about Gambia before, but Gambia is another country in West Africa that so far has escaped the Ebola pandemic that has ravaged Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. And they want to keep it that way. And we did get a report finally out of the NIH, National Institutes of Health in Atlanta, Georgia, about what they did to the Ebola patient that they treated. And remember, we had several doctors that were working for NGOs over in West Africa, and some of them caught Ebola from their patients. And one of them, well, at least one, ended up being treated at the NIH. And they said all they gave him was supportive care, so he recovered on his own. But you have to understand that they are finding that Ebola resides in the body, and it resides in the body for a long time. In some cases, almost, well, they don't know, it might be a year or more in different parts of the body. So all those people that we treated over here, the ones we treated in Utah and in New Jersey and in Texas, are all probably shedding Ebola virus. And what they are doing about that, well, at least they're starting to do studies to find out how long the Ebola lasts in their bodies. And they're starting to think that Zika is, even though it's a different variety of virus, it's entirely different. It's spread by mosquito, not by direct contact with other people or people who are sick. But they're starting to think that not only Zika, but also its associated viruses, such as yellow fever and West Nile viruses, are not just acute. That is, they've been treating them as though a person gets them, they get better, and then they're gone. Well, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I have a nice article in there about a fellow whose acute case turned into a chronic case, and essentially he is disabled. There's nothing that he can do. He can't work anymore. And before that, he was a vigorous man in his 30s. So their whole paradigm by the medical community is changing. They used to think that like disease was as though it were an injury. For instance, maybe you get a cut on your arm, and they stitch it up to make sure your bone isn't broken. They stitch it up, and then in 6 weeks you get the cast off, and then it's, well, maybe not as good as new, but at least you aren't disabled with it.
Right.
But now they think that the viruses aren't like that. It's not just an acute disease, that it's a chronic disease that continues in your body, and they have to change their whole paradigm of thinking about these viral diseases.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I have a feeling that what we have right now is a situation that is the tip of the iceberg. And we not only have the Zika virus, which is only a 15 base pair change from its previous version that wasn't causing massive acute brain changes. We're now seeing evidence like in JAMA, a 80-year-old person up in New England that developed brain inflammation, and they actually identified the virus in their brain. We now know that it causes chronic viral infections even in kids that recover from microcephaly, but they actually can get degenerative eye changes and go blind. It's my suspicion that this causes a chronic sexually transmitted disease, and they are telling them 6 months to wear condoms, but my guess is that's just an interim recommendation. It's also going to massively affect fertility, because any woman who has had an infection, they have to presume that the virus may be, even though it's cleared from the blood, may grow in their uterus or other, we call remote tissues, for years, which means they may not possibly be able to have a safe pregnancy at any time after getting infected. And they don't need to travel themselves. Their sexual partner can transmit it to them, and they may end up with a chronic remote infection, just like Ebola can reactivate and can go on for many months in a reemergence of the eye, or what's called remote sight. So there's a lot of unknowns here. And I think that this is something that's very concerning to me, that we don't have answers, but we need to ask the right questions and have ways of monitoring to see if we can develop an answer. I don't see that yet, do you?
Well, we do have some interesting movement along in that direction, and that is that for one thing, the FDA have eased their guidelines to provide access to an abortion pill, which only requires that you see a healthcare provider once, and they give you the first part of the abortion pill, and then you can get the other one over the counter. And they've also made it easier for people to. They've made it so that instead of up to 7 weeks, you can get an abortion up to 10 weeks. Now, why they didn't make it the first?
This is also very concerning to me. Firstly, they're pushing the abortion issue. Number one, we have antipathogenics that can eliminate the virus. So if they did PCR testings in early pregnancy and gave the antipathogenics we have, we would kill the virus before it would cause UPR and unfolding protein activation of the endoplasmic reticulum, causing brain cell apoptosis and cortical atrophy. The problem is that it's not just an inborn, an unborn illness. It may be an adult illness or an elderly illness, and it may show in different presentations. But I think that loosening the guidelines for abortion isn't going to fix this problem. The real issue is that if women are permanently damaged and they're not going to use antipathogenics to clear their body of the actual presence of the Zika virus completely, and also the Oxitec OX513A double-stranded DNA jumping riddle genes, the person can actually be a platform weaponizing not only Zika but other pathogens. And so to do a quick, we call, response to say, we're going to, we're just going to loosen up the guidelines for abortion, I think is really, is not a real solution. It's a quick solution that doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't also prevent, like some of these women, if they don't clear the virus, which you can prove with PCR testing and the OX513A genes, the only other alternative is permanent sterilization. That's really not good. And welcome back, and we're going to talk about after the show the Zika virus jumping genes or riddle genes. And I posted the article up on Zika virus. It's also up on our live stream channel, the video. I think I'm going to write a more extensive article, become a mini, an ebook that'll be available also on the site. And I raise questions that I always want to provide what I call a platform for testing protocols, so you can actually validate or prove or disprove this theory. Again, a theory is something based on scientific premises, based on other researchers, scientific facts, and lab testing and protocols that allow you to actually validate whether or not the z-score, or the probability that it's not a random event, that it may be probable. And that's how you prove a theory. And so Zika is pretty scary stuff. But remember, if the theory is correct that the oxitec or death gene, in fact, I have a little, I was looking up the riddle Zika virus jumping gene, which has its own endonuclease that can insert it anywhere in the genome, so it can insert it in multiple places, including other double-stranded DNA in plants, insects, etc. So it's not just going to affect one species. It jumps across genera, phyla, and species, so it can cause changes. And the main thing changes it does is increases what's called oxidative stress. That's a pretty big deal. So what's the latest that you have on your blog about Zika and other organisms like Ebola? Because I think they transferred a lot of the money from the Ebola projects that Obama has set aside into the Zika virus under Obama.
Well, that's exactly what they did. And in fact, on Tuesday, they all got together. That's the head of NIH, that's Dr. Fauci. It was the assistant head to CDC. I don't know why Dr. Friedman wasn't there. The head of HHS and two other people were there. And they, it was broadcast. It was a thing that you could watch. I haven't watched it yet. But they talked about how they were going to, Dr. Fauci just said, he says, I'm not going to wait for this. I'm going to get ahead of it. And so he has been instructed by his boss to take the Ebola money and the extra Ebola money. In other words, they had allocated $30 million or something like that for Ebola should it break out in the United States. And he says, well, we're not going to be worried about Ebola because of Zika, we don't know anything about. And so he's going to allocate that to looking at the Zika virus. And then the president has sent a bill for $2 billion into the House, asking them to approve another $2 billion for Zika mitigation. And so I think that it's on. I think it's on the radar at the administrative level anyway. I'm not sure that it's on the radar anyplace else, like the military, because
right.
You know the military sends soldiers into all parts of the United States, including Texas, and Houston, Texas, is one of the places that they mention as being a worry for getting for Zika to get a handle or a hold on in the United States, because there's a lot of people, for instance, in Houston, Texas, that don't have screens on their windows or doors, and they don't have air conditioning, and they aren't real tidy people. I mean, you know, they're poor, and so they just leave. They just leave water laying around in pans and in their yards. Now you talk about, so Houston is going to be one place that they're going to be looking at in detail. The other place is Florida. Now Florida people do have windows on their have screens on their windows, and they do have air conditioning for the most part, but there's no way you can get rid of all the water. There's so much water in Florida, they'll never be able to drain all the catch pots and all the canals and everything where a mosquito might lay an egg. So those are two places they're going to be looking at, and in fact, Florida is already having indigenous transfer of Zika to people, as is Texas.
Right.
Yeah, they keep saying that no, everything is being brought in from other countries, and that's not so. There have been transfers within the United States now.
Yeah, and we have to start being novel in terms of how we approach these things, like zone releases of our monoatomic Tesla-activated Nutrimedical and silver 100, which is the only ionic silver hundreds of thousands of times stronger than any other silver. They can be sprayed in a very dilute solution over large areas of water, lakes, cities, and so on a regular basis every couple of days, would kill the virus off in these pathogenic vectoring mosquitoes. The other danger is that it can transfer to other forms of insects. For example, there's been some papers that suggest it could get into northern mosquitoes like in Minnesota or even Canada, where it could survive the kind of weather you wouldn't expect it to survive. And the virus also under this, again, oxidative stress may continue to mutate and develop new adaptive capacities, because what you're really seeing here is the adaptive capacity to become pathogenic is increased because of the OX513A gene. And it wasn't many base pair changes. It's only 15 base pairs, because they sequenced it in Hong Kong and they've sequenced it elsewhere. The changes to the RNA of the Zika virus is not significant. It's only a small number of base pairs. So a lot of people would assume it's a whole lot of changes. No, it's not, to make it a lot more deadly.
Well, and now they're looking at other viruses in the same family. Yellow fever and West Nile virus are two of them that they're going back and they're looking at, because they just thought that they were acute illnesses. That is, you caught them and then you got better and that was the end of it. But now they're finding out that years later, 20 years later, people are having meningitis, encephalitis. Apparently it resides in the central nervous system for a long time, much like chickenpox does. When when you get older, then you get shingles, because that chickenpox virus has been hiding in your nervous system all those years.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have to look at their paradigm. And some of these, what they thought were just acute illnesses, are not. They're going to be, and of course, you can die from West Nile virus if you get encephalitis or meningitis. And in fact, I hope people read the article that I published on that. It's titled "The Illness That Never Ends: West Nile Virus," and it's kind of like those people that got the Guillain-Barré syndrome after the 1996 flu virus, and it was when they first introduced H1N1, and it was a bad virus, and people today are suffering from Guillain-Barré syndrome. And that is a paralyzing syndrome, and it's an upward progressing
it's ascending
paralysis.
Yeah, they call it ascending.
It starts
and also
from the feet,
persists.
And if it ascends to your lungs, you die.
Right, but it also persists. It's not just something that it can go away to some extent, but if it ascends high enough, it may be permanent. It doesn't necessarily recover.
That's
we have
right.
things that can help that, though. It's talking about something I mentioned in one of my articles in Hour 2 about biometrics. And just to give a little promo, my son Matthew DEAGLE, his website is MatthewDeagle.com. He'll pop in next week to talk about some other important issues. But, Matthew, I think what we talked about the other night, late at night.
I have a show as well. I have a show on Rents Radio where I discuss the symbolic meaning of things and the general tendency of society based on our thoughts.
Right, yeah, and also I would call biblical astrology. Yeah. You have to understand the three wise men and Moses. Many of the ancient prophets actually understood not the perverted form of the Middle Ages, but biblical astrology. We'll talk about that now. Next, what I want to talk about for this little segment.
Just the true astrology. As I said, I wanted to briefly touch upon the theological objections to astrology and the reasons why certain kinds of divination were condemned by the prophets.
It's not surprising
because of an intertwinement of certain false forms with worship of
we'll get into that next week. Right now, I want to kind of focus on this one topic.
Why don't you discuss first some of the evidence you've come across?
Okay, the first thing is back in 94-95, I had presidential level clearance and took care of employees working at Schriever Air Force Base, Falcon, Colorado, U.S. Space Command, Strategic Defense, Star Wars, and many other super high classified projects, including the Special Op Team at the Alpha Premier Building when I did the exit exam. What I said, and I also traveled to Oak Ridge National Laboratories and to Affymetrix in Chicago, is they have the DNA biochip, which they developed. It can take 1/100 of a drop of blood and an endonuclease, and actually fractioning your DNA can tell you your histocompatibility locus antigens of your tissue type, your blood group types and subtypes for organ transplant and blood transplantation, blood transfusions, but also can determine you from anybody else on the planet. And they have biometric now access to buildings that are based on iris and retina scans, which are very accurate terahertz scans that go through the side of a vehicle at 70 miles an hour that can tell who you are, which are pretty accurate. The terahertz scans are more accurate than facial recognition, which is why they want to have a terahertz scanner even on telephone poles and in cities and things that you can't see, but you're being terahertz scanned with the same type of technology, only more advanced than the airports where they put you in that kind of round chamber.
So the basic thing is, I mean, in India, they already have a biometric ID card issued to everyone.
Right. Everybody in India, by the way, is the first nation on Earth that is a large nation that has scanned the iris and the digital fingerprints of every citizen in India. That's what I've heard. They just finished it this year.
But that's not even close to the worst possibility, because actually the worst possibility exists here in the U.S. and in the European Union, where we have this NSA-CIA surveillance program in place, which will allow this not just to be an ID card, but to be a means of tracking you to the meter, wherever you go, and even possibly connecting your bank accounts to the card, and eventually replacing the whole system with an implanted microchip, which is only biometrically compatible with you.
Yeah, and what they do now is they use this thing
between something like an iris scan or a thumbprint, as well as this chip, which, by the way, just like the chip in your iPhone, will be used to track you wherever you go, to give an automatic Google Maps type update of your location. So there'll be no place to run or hide. If you are suspected of any what they call a crime, you'll have virtually no freedom.
Yeah, now there's several different layers of this.
Symbolism, when you think about biblical astrology, it's very important to understand holistically and symbolically, because what's happening here is the events prophesied in the book of Revelation. If we observe, if you read the book of Revelation in terms of current times, it is closer to things that are possible and happening now than anything else in the past.
Yeah, it's actually very clear, isn't it? And there's multiple ways. It could be a tattoo. It could be a chip in your cell phone. All of the credit cards now have a chip in them, and all through Europe. America is one of the last nations that actually had a reader's slip on the side of the card. Those are all going away.
Yes, it could also be. It's going to be in one of two optional forms, likely. One form is an implanted chip. The other form will be an infrared tattoo, which is invisible physically, but which is an actual mark on your skin.
Right. Now, by the way, the mark itself doesn't condemn you.
So, because the chip will allow mass surveillance as well.
Yeah, let me explain the spiritual side of this, and I want to get your response on this, Matt. And this is important because it ties in with things like Zika virus and biosecurity and all the other issues. What people should understand, it means you have to believe in sustainable development, population control, which is very dangerous. You see, when all you have to do is get a nation to advance, like America, Germany, whatever, and the population stabilizes.
The population needs to be controlled.
Well, let me finish my statement, Matt.
Totalitarianism. It's the same thing with terrorism, right?
Yeah, let me finish my statement first.
A real problem as an excuse for totalitarianism.
Right, but let me explain. As soon as you get a nation that advances like Germany or the West or Japan, if anything, you actually have population collapse.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Well, yeah, I know, but let me finish my statement, okay? Yeah, let me finish, please, Matt. Important, okay? So what I'm saying is, you don't want the government controlling population. For example, they moved from a one-child to a two-child policy, but what they do now is they aggressively go after women who try to have a third child, and they actually will even abort right up to the moment of delivery. A lot of time mutilating women, they get chronic...
It's not... You never want to... totalitarianism is never the solution. The problem, the overpopulation problem must be solved by humane and free means.
Yeah, but there's a way to do that. That's real. We'll talk about that at another time. What I want to do is concentrate on the mark system.
Countries like India and China, if they don't reduce their population, will eventually get in wars with each other over resources.
Yeah, but that's easy to solve.
The Chinese have already developed bioweapons specifically targeted to Indians.
But, well, we posted an...
which they can drop on Bombay or other cities and kill millions or hundreds.
Just stop for a second. Well, the important thing is we showed an article that I posted up. It was actually in Christianity Today, but actually I talked about it from 1997, going to Zurich, Switzerland. Last year, the Catholic Doctors Association of Kenya found the same thing. The WHO were putting in population control tetanus vaccine to women to create antibodies against their choriona of their placenta. So here's what I want to know. The mark of the beast system is tied to biosecurity. Now, so thanks, Matt. What I want you to do is you can hold there for a moment, but I'm going to ask Ann. Biosecurity is a big deal. We now have people coming in with Chagas spirochetosis, Hansen's disease, or coming into the country. We now have Zika virus. It's a sexually transmitted illness. They're not even making biosecurity of, for example, blood supply. So a lot of places like in Arizona and elsewhere, they're now having troubles with getting enough blood because they don't know if people have actually been exposed, and they're not doing proper testing of people for presence of Zika, which can persist in people and may make it the blood supply insecure. Biosecurity is tied directly to this idea of a market. It's not just for money transfer, it's for control of movement. It's if there's major terrorism on American soil, say this year, and there's a new domestic security bill, one of the things I think is an increasing trackability of the population to prevent what we call the 1 or 2% of extreme Muslims and anybody else we call patriots that are kind of a little off their rocker, that are gun-toting maniacs, kind of getting out of control because of the increasing aggressive and inappropriate activity of, say, the Bureau of Land Management, which, by the way, they're not going to back down. So how do you tie that in to biosecurity? Because I see this biometric system coming in on the coat strings of the healthcare bill, Obamacare, which, by the way, the chip is actually in the Obamacare bill. People don't realize that it's actually scheduled to be put in people in the Obamacare bill itself in 2018, 2 years from now. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. Well,
2 years.
One of the proposals is that we track people when they leave. For instance, let's say a traveler is coming in from Europe to the United States.
Right.
They would have to check that traveler in Europe. And then also when they came into the United States. In other words, instead of just an entry screening, which we do very poorly over here, by the way,
right,
because we don't have health professionals at every airport. We have them at 4 airports.
You don't need them
in
at
New Jersey, New York, Atlanta, and Los Angeles, and that's all.
All you need, basically, I'll show you the elements of biosecurity there. You need a control room where you actually do testing on people and hold them in that holding area until their test in 15 minutes clears them of the presence of not only the virus PCR, but the OXY513A genes. If they're positive, they have to be quarantined until you transfer them to a facility where they're not going to transfer the virus. It's not just that. There's other major bioterrorism issues that once bioterrorism happens in this new domestic security bill, they are going to contract and control the population. And I see a convergence of the economic instability with derivatives markets collapsing, almost certain terrorism before the election cycle this year, and almost certain a bipartisan bill with biometrics tied to terrorism and induced chaos, which Obama is saying, and he smirks and looks down at the floor while he's saying, you don't want to turn away a stranger. They're not vetting these people, and they're not making any attempt, and they're inserting them in towns and cities around the place. For example, where I live in North County, San Diego, which is chock-a-block full of veterans and live active service Marines armed to the teeth, and by the way, so am I. What we have is a situation that's very unstable, and the government and Obama wants it so they can have enough terror to start inducing and putting chips or tattoos or making, as I said, a joke, mandatory Velcro. You mentioned a couple of sites, which is Ann Corcoran's site, which is a refugee resettlement watch. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Matthew?
Yeah, basically, Ann Corcoran's been following this phenomenon of refugee resettlements in the U.S. A lot of it clandestine, a lot of it not even telling you how many or where specifically they're being placed, but you can tell by where the centers are, and she gives you an idea of where these refugees are being placed, already thousands and thousands in this country, not just Europe. What I think is happening here, in terms of the mark of the beast, as prophesied in Revelation, is that the beast, first of all, symbolically, is not just a literal animal or a demon or something.
Right.
The beast is actually symbolic, if you read it closely, of a totalitarian empire.
Exactly. It's a beast empire.
Of a union of various countries into one country, i.e. the European Union, and the USA as one country.
Well, they've done that with Obama with the Transatlantic Partnership and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. They've literally created trade zones that make the government vestigial.
Yes, it's the so-called New World Order. And even you can't even really blame the federal government of Obama, because they're just doing what the CIA is.
No, they're becoming... The real thing happened. We talked about this. We're going to bring on specials to discuss
it. I think it's dangerous to go after the federal government, because they themselves are the last thing holding together our basic rights. And if they are destroyed,
the real issue is
if they are destroyed through division as they plan through agents like I think Ted Cruz is an agent, for example, if the federal government collapses, that will allow anarchy to arise, which then has to be restored to order by a totalitarian surveillance system, which they've already put in place.
Yeah, what we have, Matt, is they have
behind all this. It's the CIA. It's certain intellectuals.
Exactly. That we've had a coup since the assassination of John F. Kennedy, so the CIA and the agencies have taken over control.
The CIA even created the chaos in the Middle East. It was actually, you can read a book by F. William Engdahl, which is about the oil wars in the Middle East. Look it up on Amazon, F. William Engdahl. It has the word New World Order in the title. Have a look at that book. If you read through that book, you'll find in there evidence that the USA's own intelligence agency, CIA, put the Ayatollah Khomeini, the first Islamic dictator, in power.
Oh, I know all about it. We've talked about that in the past, Matt. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
It was part of a strategy to disrupt the entire Middle East so that the chaos would then spread to Russia and disrupt Russia. Now,
exactly. That's part of the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski called The Grand Chessboard. And in fact, he's one of the ones that selected Barack Obama and even recommended his name change to Barack Obama from Barry Soetoro. So Barack Obama is a complete manufactured entity by the globalists. So Ann Corcoran, again, that's Refugee Resettlement Watch. We only have
Refugee Resettlement Watch. Just search for it on Google.
I'll have the link posted up. And I'd like you to respond to that because we have Earth changes too now. A lot of people have called in and they want to know about what's going on. And I have people that basically don't understand what we call climate change. What's going on with climate change is there's galactic and solar events, we talked about with Professor McCanney, that are beyond the Earth, which are changing solar and galactic activity. But there's also things that are happening because they put nanoparticles in the upper atmosphere. The lower level thing I call hot cross bun or chemtrails are basically cloud forming technology. The real dangerous stuff is not that you can see. And when they put it up at 73 to 80,000 feet, it spreads out like a Dyson sphere around the planet. So you don't have to have it sprayed over Central America or China. It'll get there. And it stays up for 2.5 to 4 years, according to the experts that I know from classified sources. Inside, because I took care of the pilots flying the Hercules C-130s and dumping out robotic drones at 73 to 80,000 feet. I also have talked to the United Nations, a person that actually founded the World Constitution Parliament Association, Dr. Isley, a physicist, and how they were going to do carbon capture and set up these nanoparticles to control climate, trigger off earthquakes and volcanoes. And the drought, for example, that's occurring right now, and the weird weather we're seeing with the jet stream, these are all induced by several things. One, drilling at the Macondo drill site that broke up the normal loop current coming out of the Gulf of Mexico. It's a pacemaker for weather. And also, they're creating blocking highs that actually create drought in the western United States. Now, it's corrected here in San Diego County, but further north, the drought's still on, isn't it?
Yes, the drought is still on, although one of the reservoirs in Northern California is 2/3 of the full, which is going to help them a lot. But the drought itself has not been corrected by the rain that they have gotten, and the El Nino pattern has pretty much stopped. They no longer have that warming. Now, we still have a warming in the Gulf of Alaska, and you'll see a lot of storms that head up from Japan and go into the Gulf of Alaska, and then eventually make their way into British Columbia. And then we out here in the Midwest, we get the Alberta Clipper or the Saskatchewan Screamer, or Manitoba Menace, and it'll bring down really cold air. And if we've had a low that has brought in the moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, then we can get really severe storms. Now, the strange thing is that we've had, and they're still not saying why, but we had a very cold pattern. I don't want to call it a polar vortex, but we had a big dip in the jet stream that brought excessively cold air down into the Caribbean. And, in fact, we even had snow
they call it a polar inversion, don't
Island. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why we have the snow occurring in Boston right now, pretty late in spring. And weather, in other words, the seasons are all mixed up, which, by the way, is also biblical. So what we need to understand is they're using climate warfare against the population. If the drought continues, by the way, it'll take several years of rainfall to correct the drought in Northern California, Oregon, and elsewhere. If it stops, we could have 100 million climate refugees. If you look at the website DEAGLE, D-E-A-G-E-L, not L-E.com, which is a military site, and the Resilient Cities Project, which has met with Obama over 20 plus times in this almost 8-year term, they plan on having 65 million Americans by 2025, 9 years from now, in super compact cities, 12 super compact cities in the central United States, no coastal populations, no cities or towns otherwise. That means they're planning on cataclysm. They're planning on climate shifts that's so dramatic that much of the population have either left the continent or country or are dead. And so this is in 9 years, so they're planning on something pretty horrendous, whether it's triggering off a war or a climate shift.
If I may make a prediction myself, given the symbolism and the overall agenda of what's happening, we observed that as I was saying, just how they tried to disrupt the Soviet Union with all sorts of extremist groups that they figured would eventually spread to their Muslim population. I think they are introducing this massive wave of refugees into Europe and secondarily into the U.S. with the intention, they know that ISIS receives $500 million
but even believe it or not, Bill Clinton is speaking against it, even disrupting the campaign of Hillary Clinton. And what's amazing to me is even some of the people, even Bill Clinton's making comments about the 8-year disaster and the climate refugee disaster. So that's pretty significant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not just climate. I mean, Bangladesh and India, though, are definitely threatened by what was symbolized by Kali, the water element. But for instance, there was recently an ominous collapse of an overpass in Kolkata, which means field of Kali. But as far as the USA and Europe, which are indeed the Beast 666, as prophesied in Revelation, it is this union, the so-called peaceful union by CIA control of the USA and Europe as one essential country in the shadows. One country of surveillance, one country of background manipulation and mind control.
And by the way, Ted Cruz's wife was one of the co-authors of the North American Union and the CFR policies for globalist government and trade zone.
He's a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Exactly. Where in Canada, the United States, and Mexico are just one trade zone. There are no borders. You know, by the way, Mexico does have a wall and a very strong border, and southern border with Central America. And it's amazing to me that Vicente Fox has the nerve to say they don't want a control of the border here when the drugs, by the way, are not just brought in by Mexican cartels. They're in collaboration with the CIA, NSA, and the Department of Injustice. That's the fact.
Once we get back after the break, I'll write some more about how this is happening.
Well, no, we're gone today, Matt. This is the end of our Friday show. We'll have you on early next week. And thank you, Ann. Amazing review of the Earth's changes and biosecurity. We'll do a blog read after the show to talk about this.
All right. You're going to call me?
I will.